"You have 48 hours to get out of this house," my daughter-in-law said right in front of my son. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and walked away like I'd already lost. But an hour later, when she finally got into the safe, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Don't do this. The lawyer. The paperwork. Please." In that moment, I realized exactly how much my silence was worth. My name is Martha. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in this house in a quiet suburb of Connecticut for 40 years. When my daughter-in-law, Brooke, told me I had exactly 2 days to move out of the home, my late husband and I built brick by brick. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just stood in the kitchen doorway, hands wrapped tight around my coffee mug, watching her. Brooke spoke with that soft, artificially sweet voice she used whenever she wanted to be especially cruel while pretending to be reasonable. My son Caleb stood next to her, staring at his shoes like the decision had already been notarized. Brooke explained that the house was too much for a woman living alone. She told me I was being selfish by hogging the space while she and Caleb needed to plan for a modern future. Then came the deadline, Friday. 2 days. Pack your personal junk, leave the keys, and don't make a scene. They wanted a fight. They were waiting for tears, for begging for some desperate argument they could use later to prove I was old, unstable, and ungrateful. But I knew something they didn't. I knew what was in the wall, safe upstairs. I knew why my husband had seemed so at peace in his final weeks. And I knew that the look on their faces when they opened that safe, believing they'd already won, would be worth every second of my silence. So I just nodded, once, said a simple, "Fine," and walked away like a woman who'd lost everything. Behind me, I heard Brooke's quiet, triumphant little laugh. The whole house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the fallout. But when Brooke started blowing up my phone just an hour later, her voice shaking with panic, it was already too late. Before I tell you what was in that safe, you have to understand how it got to this point. My home had always been a place for family. After my husband passed away 2 years ago, I invited Caleb and Brooke to move into the upper floor. I thought family looked out for each other. But Brooke didn't see a home. She saw an investment. It started small. First, she moved my herb pots off the windowsill because they didn't fit the aesthetic. Then she took over the living room. Slowly, I became a guest in my own house. Caleb, my own flesh and blood, just looked the other way. He's a good man, but he's terrified of conflict. He let Brooke start dictating my spending. "Martha, do you really need the thermostat this high? Just put on a sweater," she'd say, with that condescending tilt of her head. They treated me like a nuisance tenant they were trying to starve out. Last week, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. They were talking about a total remodel, turning my bedroom into a walk-in closet. Brooke said, she'll understand once we present it as a done deal. They thought I was old and slow. But there's an old saying, still waters run deep. I watched Brooke start sorting through my mail, looking for the deed and the title. She was looking for power. What she didn't realize was that I'd seen through the happy family facade months ago. I'd stopped paying for the bulk groceries. I'd started locking my own supplies in the small pantry. It was a quiet protest they mistook for weakness. They thought my silence was acceptance. It was actually preparation. I was just waiting for them to drop the mask completely. That moment came at dinner with the ultimatum. They thought 48 hours would break me. They had no idea I'd already made my move while they were still debating paint swatches. Wednesday went by in a blur, but I was wide awake. While Brooke was upstairs, literally setting out cardboard boxes for me, I sat in the kitchen sipping tea. I didn't pack a single suitcase. Instead, I made 3 quick phone calls. The first was to the local HVAC guy who'd serviced our furnace for years. The second was to my private account, the one Caleb didn't have access to. The third call was the most important. I wasn't calling to complain. I was calling to finalize the facts. Brooke came downstairs, iPad in hand. "We already have a realtor coming by on Saturday, Martha. It would be best if you were at your sister's by then," she said, not even looking at me. I didn't answer. I just stared out the window at the garden. I remembered my husband's words. "Martha, trust what's in your hand, not what people promise you." Brooke thought I was helpless because I wasn't throwing a fit. In her world, power was whoever screamed the loudest. In my world, power was holding the deed and the service contracts. I went down to the basement and adjusted the systems. It wasn't sabotage. It was just a return to the fine print. Since the upstairs and downstairs had separate meters and the accounts were strictly in my name, I simply called the utility companies to shut off the service to the second floor effective Friday. I'd been paying their way for 2 years while they saved for the future. When I came back up, I packed a small bag with my essential documents. My silence was now a weapon. I saw Caleb in the hall. He looked jumpy. "Mom, it's just temporary," he stammered. I looked him dead in the eye, didn't say a word, and went to my room. The time for talking was over. It was time for consequences. Thursday night. The house was chilly because I'd already cut the upstairs heat. Brooke was complaining loudly about the ancient wiring, still clueless. I went into my husband's old study. There, behind an old landscape painting, was the safe. Brooke had spent months eyeing that safe. She convinced herself it held gold bars or a secret will that handed her the keys to the kingdom. She knew the code was our anniversary. What she didn't know was that I'd cleared it out Tuesday morning. I replaced the contents with a single plain envelope. On it, in my husband's clear, steady handwriting, it said, "For those who honor the legacy." Inside wasn't a new will. It was much simpler. It was the formal revocation of the intent to gift letter we drafted years ago, but never finalized. Along with it were 10 years of receipts for property taxes, insurance, and repairs costs that Caleb was supposed to have shared according to our family agreement, but never did. I also included the paperwork showing I'd transferred the property into a charitable land trust. The house was now protected as a historical landmark with a life estate clause that guaranteed I live there until the day I die. I wasn't leaving the house to my kids. I was giving it to people who actually valued it. The safe was a time bomb. I swung the heavy steel door shut and moved the painting back. As I left the room, I ran into Brooke. She gave me a smug smile. "Got your bags packed, Martha? Tomorrow's the big day." I nodded calmly. "Yes, Brooke. Tomorrow everything will be settled." I didn't feel angry anymore, just a deep sense of relief. I had taken control back not by fighting, but by being the legal owner who fulfilled her duties while they only obsessed over their rights. I went to bed and slept better than I had in years. Friday, 5 p.m. The deadline was up. Brooke and Caleb were standing in the foyer like they were ready to physically escort me to the curb. They'd even rented a small U-Haul for my furniture. Brooke held out her hand. "The keys, Martha, and the code for the safe. We need to get the paperwork ready for the realtor tomorrow." I reached into my purse, but I didn't pull out my house keys. I pulled out a small notepad. I gave them the code. "Everything you need to know about this house is up there," I said. My voice was so steady that Caleb actually flinched. For the first time, he looked like he realized something was very wrong. Brooke sprinted up the stairs, Caleb trailing behind her. I stayed in the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. The house was dead silent until I heard the thud of the heavy safe door opening. Then silence again. 1 minute, 2 minutes. There were no cheers about finding gold, just the rustle of paper. Then I heard Brooke's voice, and the sweetness was gone. It was a screech. "What is this?" Caleb read this. "She can't do this." They practically fell down the stairs. Brooke stormed into the kitchen, the envelope shaking in her hand. Her face was blotchy and red. "You gave the house away to a trust." "Are you insane?" I turned around slowly. "I secured the house, Brooke, just like you wanted. It's being professionally managed now. You have 48 hours to get your things out of the upstairs. Since you aren't legal tenants and I'm officially revoking your permission to occupy, the legal process is actually quite simple." Caleb stared at me shell-shocked. "Mom, why?" I looked at him without an ounce of bitterness. "Because you stood by and watched her try to throw me out of my own life, Caleb. And because a house is for people who want to live in it, not for people who want to sell it before the owner is even cold." Brooke tried threats first. "We're contesting this. You're old. You don't know what you're doing. We're calling a lawyer." I took a sip of my tea. "Go ahead, Brooke. But the contract with the trust is ironclad. They have the right of first refusal, and I have the life estate. And before you ask, the electricity and water for the upstairs are scheduled to be cut off at midnight. I'm not paying for your lifestyle anymore." Caleb looked like he'd been punched. "But we don't have the money for a new place right now. We put everything into our plans." Brooke snapped at him. "Shut up, Caleb." She turned back to me. "You can't just put us on the street. We're family." "Family?" I asked quietly. "Family was the word you used when you gave me 2 days to leave my own home. I'm giving you the same amount of time. That seems fair, doesn't it?" The irony was so thick, even Brooke was speechless for a second. She realized her power had evaporated. Without my money, my house, and my kindness, they were just 2 people with expensive tastes and no foundation. Brooke tried crying next. They weren't real tears. They were the tears of a woman who just realized she'd lost her bet. "Martha, please, let's talk. We can fix this." I stood up and put my cup in the sink. "There's nothing left to talk about. I spent 2 years waiting for you to talk with me instead of about me. Now I'm done." I walked to the front door and held it open. It was a clear gesture. They needed to leave at least for now to let the reality sink in. They left, but I knew the real battle for their sanity had just begun. Saturday morning started without the usual stomping over my head. It was eerily quiet. Caleb and Brooke had crashed at a friend's house, but their stuff was still upstairs. I used the time to change the locks on the interior door connecting the units. Not out of malice, but to protect the privacy they'd ignored for so long. I didn't feel guilty. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. It was Caleb alone. He looked exhausted. Brooke was probably waiting in the car. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked softly. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table in the same chair he'd used as a kid. "She wants to sue you," he said. I nodded. "I know. But she has no ground to stand on. The house belongs to the trust. I'm just the lifetime manager. There is no inheritance left to sell." Caleb put his head in his hands. "I never wanted it to get like this. I just wanted everyone to be happy." I put my hand on his. Caleb wanting everyone to be happy usually means you're okay with one person being miserable. In this house, that person was me. He actually cried then. For the first time in years, I saw my son not Brooke's husband. He confessed they were deep in debt. They'd been banking on the house to take out a massive equity loan to cover their credit cards. That's why the pressure. That's why the rush. The truth was ugly and pathetic. It was never about my comfort. It was about using me as a bailout. I felt bad for him, but I didn't change my mind. Pity isn't a reason to give up your home. I told him he'd always be my son, but this house was no longer their ATM. By Sunday afternoon, the phone harassment started. Brooke had clearly realized Caleb wasn't getting anywhere. She called every 5 minutes. I didn't turn the phone off. I just put it in the hallway drawer. I wanted to be in control of when I was available. When I checked an hour later, I had 24 missed calls and a flood of texts. Martha, we need to destroy those papers. Let's go to a notary. We can find a solution. Think about the grandkids we might have one day. Every message was a different angle. Greed, guilt-tripping, blackmail. One voicemail was particularly telling. Brooke was screaming, "You're ruining Caleb. If the bank finds out we don't have the house as collateral, we lose everything." There it was, the we that really meant me. She had dragged Caleb into this mess and expected me to pay the tab. I didn't delete the message, I saved it. If they ever tried to challenge my mental state, those messages would be the best evidence of their motive. I went into the garden and pruned the roses. The neighbors waved over the fence, having no clue about the drama behind my walls. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was hiding a lie. I was the woman who saved her home. That evening, Caleb came back to pick up the first round of boxes. He moved them to the car in silence. Brooke didn't get out. She just stared through the windshield at the house, like it was an enemy that had defeated her. Monday morning, the day the peace was supposed to return. I watched from the upstairs window as the U-Haul pulled in again. This time, Brooke was helping. She moved mechanically, her face a mask of pure rage. They didn't say a word to each other. They lugged suitcases and bins and garment bags. It wasn't a dignified exit. It was a retreat. I didn't go out to gloat. I stayed upstairs. I wanted to give them the space to leave without me being the audience for their failure. Around noon, the truck was full. Brooke stood in the driveway one last time and looked up at my window. She knew I was there. She didn't wave. She just glared with a look that promised she wasn't done. Then slammed the truck door. Caleb lingered for a second. He looked up at the house where he grew up. I hoped that someday he'd realize I'd done him a bigger favor than giving him a house I'd forced him to stand on his own feet. When the truck pulled away, the house suddenly felt lighter. The energy of greed and constant monitoring was gone. I went downstairs and locked the front door. I turned the deadbolt twice. It was a familiar sound, but it felt different today. It sounded like closure. I walked through the empty upstairs. It smelled like Brooke's heavy perfume and dust. I opened all the windows to let it out. The crisp New England air rushed in, cleaning the rooms. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was free. The modern future they'd planned for me had failed. My own future was just beginning. It's been 3 months since that Friday. The house in Stone Mill Point officially belongs to the trust now. Once a month, a very nice man stops by to check on the property and have tea with me. He asks if anything needs fixing. He treats me with a level of respect my own family had forgotten. Caleb calls every now and then. He's living in a small apartment in the city. He sounds sad but clearer. He and Brooke split up. The debt and the loss of the sure-thing inheritance were too much for a relationship built on sand. He comes to visit on Sundays sometimes. We don't talk about the safe or the contract. We talk about the weather, his new job, and the old days. I haven't seen Brooke since. She sent a message through a friend calling me a cold-hearted woman. I just smiled. If clarity and self-preservation are considered cold, then I'll take the winter. My life has a new rhythm. I decide when the heat is on who sits in my garden and where my money goes. I've learned that blood might make you related, but it isn't a hall pass for disrespect. Real family are the ones who stay when there's nothing left to take. I sit on my porch a lot now, watching the sun go down over the trees. The house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet. I didn't lose anything that was actually worth keeping. I just pruned the dead weight to save the tree. Whenever you hear this story, remember your boundaries are your protection. It's never too late to take the keys to your own life back into your hands. My name is Martha, and I am finally the mistress of my own home again. And that is the best feeling in the world. Sometimes you don't have to say a word, you just have to be prepared when the moment comes.